Namaste and a very warm welcome to the Nationalist Madrasi. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Ashish. He knows in and out everything about the history of Kashmir as well. Yes, today we are going to discuss about the history of Kashmir as well. Namaste Ashish ji, thank you so much for accepting our invitation and coming here and giving a podcast for us. Thank you so much Ashish ji.
Thank you, Dharmaraghavanji. Thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
So we people, people from South India or let's say the other part of India as well, know very less history about the Kashmir, the real history of Kashmir as well. So tell us about the real history, and we will go for an in-depth discussion about what all things which has happened right from the history of the introduction of Saivam into the as a bigger part of the history of Kashmir as well. So from that till today's happenings in Kashmir as well. So tell us about the brief history about where it all started and what is the history of Kashmir as well, Ji.
The history of Kashmir, you asked me a very, very wide question which spans several centuries and even thousands of years. In the context of where Kashmir is today, I think it starts off in, let's say, the 14th century when Islam first stepped into Kashmir. So that is where you could say the downfall of Kashmir as an integral part of Indic civilization started. And I don't say this lightly or frivolously when I say that the introduction of Islam in Kashmir was responsible for the downfall of Kashmir. And that happened through a process of demographic inversion over a course of 5-6 centuries.
Okay.
Starting with the first ruler that entered Kashmir, Rinchen, who was not really a Muslim, but he was a tribal who came in from the Buddhist parts of Ladakh and up north, and he basically usurped the throne because it was a time of great chaos. The rulers of Kashmir had become weak, the Hindu rulers, and this had happened over a course of 150 years or so, where one ruler after another was not the strongest or the most wise, and so Kashmiri society was suffering already at mismanagement and misgovernance. And at that time of chaos, Rinchen rose to the throne, and he basically converted to Islam. He first made an offer to convert to Hinduism, but that was not accepted, and then he converted to Islam, and that is where it all started.
Okay.
And after that, one ruler after there was a period in which the Hindus again gained control of the throne, but that was a very small period. And
after 14th century.
After 14th century, that was just after Rinchen. But again, that period was followed by 5-6 centuries of Islamic rule. The most notorious of the rulers that followed being Sikandar Butchikan. Butchikan was an epitaph given to him because he was known to be an idol breaker, and there are several stories and several historical accounts of his brutality, the way in which he completely destroyed all the traces of dharma in the valley, destroyed temples, killed Hindus, forced people to convert to Islam and things like that.
In that time itself?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And then it was followed by the Chucks, the Afghans, and the Afghans were the last Muslim rulers, after which the Sikh empire was established, but it lasted for a very brief period of 27 years. And then, due to the Anglo-British War. And in between, I must say that there was a period of benevolent rule by a Muslim king, and this was the famous Zainul Abidin,
Yeah.
who is known to be the most benevolent Islamic ruler in Kashmir and perhaps in all of India,
Okay.
because he was quite tolerant, and he rebuilt some of the destroyed temples also. That is what the accounts say. So the Sikh rule happened because Kashmiri Pandits, a delegation of Kashmiri Pandits in secrecy, led by Birbal Dhar, they met. They went to the court of Maharaja Ranjit Singh and basically persuaded him to come to Kashmir and to attack the Afghans. The Afghans were barbarians. They were really cruel rulers, and they were cruel to everyone, including the Muslim population. And there was a time during the Afghan rule in India, that in Kashmir, that Hindu girls had to their noses were cut off by their own families because they didn't want them to look beautiful, because they would get abducted and raped, or just smuggled across to the Central Asian slave market, sex slave market, all that. So Maharaja Ranjit Singh kindly obliged, and he was successful in ousting the Afghans, and the Sikh rule was established along with the help of the Dogras. But following the Anglo-Sikh War, the Dogras, the Britishers won, and they offered the entire territory to Dogras. They sold it off to Dogras, and the Dogra Rajputs came to rule Kashmir, and this rule lasted till 1947.
Okay.
And famously where
Maharaja
Ranjit
Hari
Singh,
Singh.
Maharaja Hari Singh had to then accede to the Union of India.
Okay. Tell us about the initial religion which was followed in Kashmir, Ashishdhar ji, because like in the valley of Ladakh today we have a Buddhist population over there, and in the ancient times of Kashmir we have seen that many Shivan temples was there, and like we used to tell that from Himalayas to the Kanyakumari there is a lot of Shiva temples. In Tamil we used to say it as Imaya Mudal Kumari Varai. So how did the religion came how did the religion lasted till 14th century, and what wonders, like I mean what are all the things which was there in the ancient times of ancient history of Kashmir as well?
What in modern parlance, the religion that was practiced in Kashmir, and the philosophy and the whole theological system that came out of Kashmir is now known as Kashmiri Shaivism. And this Shaiva religion is obviously the supreme consciousness is that of Shiva, and this religion, it evolved. There were several streams of Shaiva thought that were in prevalence in Kashmir, and several masters who wrote several treatises on the philosophy of Shaivism. I will not go into the minute details of those philosophies, because then it will go from history to religion. But basically, like the Kashmir Shaivism, there is the Spanda school, and there is the Prativignya school, and several other masters who wrote their own, let's call it theories of consciousness. The classical six darshanas of Hinduism, of which Sankhya is one of those darshanas, they describe reality in terms of tattvas, and there are 25, if I'm not wrong, 24 or 25 tattvas that are described as gradations of consciousness in the Sankhya school. The Kashmiri masters, however, went one step further, and in Kashmir Shaivism there are 36 tattvas. So to give you an example of the refinement of thought and the refinement of the exploration of consciousness in Kashmiri Shaiva thought, let's say there are four basic states of awareness that we all know of. right? There is the Jagrut state, which is the waking state. There is Swapna, which is the dream state. Then there is the Sushupti, which is dreamless, deep sleep. And then what is called as Turiya, which is the fourth,
Okay.
which is beyond these three states of consciousness. So that is pan-Hinduism. These are the four levels of, or the four kinds of awareness that we talk about. But in Shaiva thought, in Kashmir Shaivism, Turiya is further categorized into three. That is Jagrat Turiya, Swapna Turiya, and Sushupta
Okay.
Turiya. And then it is described how each of these differ. And the Turiya state, there is no Turiya because Turiya is undifferentiated consciousness. It is the supreme Shaiva consciousness. So, so the exploration of these subjects in Shaiva thought is very, very refined, very minute, and it goes into discussions that are so esoteric that sometimes we can't even relate to it, because at least I can speak for myself. I have not been to the Turiya state, so I don't know what Turiya Jagrat and Turiya Swapna would be.
Okay.
But that is the kind of treaties and the levels in which that has been explored. So all these schools of thought within Kashmir Shaivism were harmonized and synthesized and brought into a systematic whole by the great Acharya Abhinav Gupta.
Okay. Okay.
And that is his greatest contribution to philosophy and to Shaiva thought, because he was able to see commonality and common ground between these various theories and bring them together from a perspective of the great sage that he was. And not only that, he also was an exponent of Natya Shastra and aesthetics and several art forms. And so, that kind of, it's very rare to see that level of sophisticated thought in world literature.
Okay.
Right? So that's been the contribution. I don't know how much I stuck to the topic, but that has been the kind of contribution that Kashmiri thought made to the civilizational Hindu thought generally.
That's great. So, what made the Islamic rulers or the rulers who ruled Kashmir to, they have converted people and they have made many peoples to leave their own state as well. What made them to do all these things, Ashishdhar? Because a lot of history we have read, but Kashmir history is somewhat way different from other history as well. So what made them to do all these things? What is their basic mindset or basic ideology as well?
You see, to answer this question, I will take the liberty of expressing my own views rather than not just sticking to the academic position. The most obvious fact here is that Islam as a religion, as a system, is a totalitarian system.
Okay.
Also, it accepts no dissent. It is exclusivist in the sense that it does not accept any other form of worship. It does not accept polytheism. It straight away rejects it. And from a Hindu perspective, if you look at it, I believe that the metaphor of Samudramanthan, right, where there is asuras fighting the devas, that applies to the civilization conflict between Hindus and Muslims, between Hinduism and Islam, where one side, where Islam represents the asuric consciousness.
Okay.
What is asuric consciousness? It is basically a consciousness that demands complete surrender to itself, and it allows no other entity, no other power to have legitimacy. So if you look at any story of asuras, starting from Hiranyakashipu, what is it that Hiranyakashipu wants from Prahlad? Absolute devotion to himself.
Yeah.
And he says that you cannot worship anyone else. So that is the format of Judeo-Christian thought. That is the template of Judeo-Christian thought. and Islam represents its most recent and most virulent strain.
Okay.
So when Islam came to India, it swept over the northwest
Okay.
and completely
Mm.
destroyed it. Destroyed it as in converted it. Complete demographic inversion happened there. However, in Kashmir, it met with stiff resistance. It met with resistance elsewhere as well, but because Kashmir was the center of intellectual life of India in some sense, it was a seat of learning. It was the kshetra of Ma Sharda. It still is, but it's dormant now. But it was the kshetra of Ma Sharda herself. So it was not easy to capture it in the way that other parts of India did, or North India or Northwest did. And there was a lot of resistance to conversion that happened. And the history of Kashmir is replete with instances of revolt and of rebellion against Islamic onslaught. So, what makes Kashmir different from other places is that despite a complete rout of civilization and arts and temples in Kashmir, there always remained a handful of hardcore practitioners,
Okay.
and most of them all of them happen to be Brahmins. And so this is, while the other Varnas were forcefully converted or they fled,
Mm.
the Brahmins somehow stuck to their ground and resisted conversion and continued their swadharma of religious practice, following rituals and devta upasana. So I think the devtas have also been kind that way, that we were able to preserve our identity and our culture in the midst of a sea of hostility. And that happened till 1990. We got a great respite in the Dogra rule, because after the Dogras came, they rebuilt a lot of the religious institutions. They rebuilt temples. They patronized.
That is in early 1900s, right?
Mid 1800s to 1947.
Okay, got it.
100-year period,
Mm.
where the Dogras patronized religious activity and arts and kind of tried to revive Hinduism in Kashmir, which is why they are so reviled and hated by the secularists also.
Okay.
So that period was critical to our survival, and we must always remain thankful to Dogra Rajputs for being there, fulfilling their role as Kshatriyas. And there is no doubt about what they've done for us. So, but the irony is that once India got its political independence and the Kshatriya rulers were, they had to accede to the Union of India. After that, it was a very downhill sort of trend. And I believe that this was a period of not just democracy, political democracy, but democratization of jihad itself.
Okay.
Because till the Muslim tyrants were ruling, the masses hardly had any role to play in these subversive or terrorist activities. But once jihad itself got democratized, courtesy the democratic setup of modern India, and common people became empowered to wage the holy war against the infidels. And what we saw in 1990 as this last and final exodus of Kashmiri Pandits from the valley was on account of the masses turning against us.
Okay, so let's talk about Lalitaditya, because like we haven't heard the term before. We saw the movie The Kashmir Files as well. So I think the professor will be saying the name who is the biggest ruler of Hindu ruler of India. The name will be Lalitaditya. Who is he? And like many history books haven't told about him, or many history lectures also didn't told about him. Who is Lalitaditya, by the way, Ashishdhar ji?
Well, I am not an expert on Lalitaditya's period at all.
Okay.
I haven't done enough study on that, but I do know that Lalitaditya was one of the greatest rulers of India, and his empire was comparable to the vastest uh, of any. I mean, whether it was the Cholas or the Chandragupta Maurya. So his empire stretched from near Afghanistan to all the way to central India. So it was a huge empire. So he patronized arts, and he was a great ruler. And the extent of his empire was on account of his martial prowess and the way in which he led military campaigns. So he had all the qualities of a great Kshatriya. He patronized arts, he built temples, he expanded the empire, the extent of the Bharatvarsh itself expanded under him. And under his period, the great sages and the masters of Shaivism that I was talking about, all this flourished. Whenever you have a great ruler, these things tend to emerge. So yeah, I mean, my understanding of his rule is very generalist. I am not a history professor, so kindly forgive me for that. But yeah, I would like to comment on the fact that even as a Kashmiri, I have unless I take special interest in finding out more about Lalitaditya, there is no way in which I will know about it.
Okay.
And so I can imagine how it is for other people, other communities. And this is something which is concerning, because here is a great ruler, one of the greatest perhaps in the medieval era, and we are having trouble even having a proper conversation about it. That reflects poorly on the education system. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about what happened in 1947 as well. The annexing into the part of mainland of India as well. So many people, when I speak, especially in Tamil Nadu, the spokespersons of DMK usually tells us like Kashmir was never a part of India. They told openly in the Republic debate also. So why wasn't Kashmir? I mean, like, wasn't the history thought wrong to them, or wasn't Kashmir not a part of India as well? Like, why wasn't why it was annexed during the 1947 time, Ashish? What happened during that time actually?
No, Kashmir being part of India, there is no doubt about it.
Okay.
Because even Pakistan.
But why
was part
that
of
question?
India.
Well, yeah, but why that question arises actually?
The question arises because of disingenuity and maliciousness on the part of such politicians of DMK or whichever party. Because a lot of them claim that even Tamil Nadu was not part of India.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
They tell us. They tell many things actually.
They will deny any state. They'll say that it was not a part of it. Assam was not a part of India. West Bengal, Bengal was not a part of India. Even Delhi was not a part
India
of
is not India.
India is not. They can go to any extent. With Kashmir, the main problem that is there today, and what confronted the leaders of at the time of partition and the independence of India was this fact that Kashmir happened to be a Muslim majority place, and it was ruled by a Hindu Raja.
Okay.
Right? And so it was a very peculiar situation, because the Muslims saw it as an insult.
Okay.
That
Joining with India.
being ruled by a kafir.
Okay.
Right? So there was always that tendency to, like for example, the Aligarh Muslim University, when the two-nation theory took birth there, the basic idea was that how can Muslims who have once ruled the Kafirs, how can now we be subjugated?
Kafirs in the sense, non-Muslims are basically especially Hindus.
Non-Muslims.
Okay.
In this case, it's Hindus only.
Okay.
In India, the Kafir means Hindu only.
Okay.
So how can we be subjugated? How can we be under the rule of a non-Muslim, a non-believer? And that comes from their theological background, that you should not accept the rule of a non-Muslim. That's how the religion teaches them. So that problem was always there. And Aligarh Muslim University, when it, one of the purposes of Aligarh Muslim University was to train Muslims in modern law and modern politics and political science to empower them to fight the battle for Islam and their Muslim community. It was fair enough so far. The one of the products of AMU was Sheikh Abdullah.
Okay.
And after graduating from AMU, he came back to Kashmir and started mobilizing people and targeting Maharaja Hari Singh because that was around the 30s, and by that time it was already expected that the Britishers were going to leave.
Okay.
So he was preparing ground for his own rise to power, and he basically whipped passions among the crowd, and he wanted to do away with the Raja. One of the incidents in 1931, which they now celebrate as a Martyrs' Day or something, was basically a conspiracy to whip up passions and to carry out some violence against Maharaja and the Hindus. So anyway, that's a different topic. So he made what is called the Muslim Conference. He founded the Muslim Conference, which was a party made to serve Muslim interests in politics. And after that, for some time, he gathered quite a bit of following because of his charisma and all that. And in the late 30s, by the late 30s, it was getting increasingly clear that there is going to be, some movement, and British are going to leave, and so there was a mobilization of public opinion, and then these polls started getting conducted a lot, and Muslim League was prominent by them. And in one of these visits to Kashmir, Jinnah visited Kashmir, and he snubbed Sheikh Abdullah. He didn't like him.
Okay.
And he kind of showed him his place, that you're nobody. So Sheikh Abdullah then realized that he did not have a great future with Pakistan.
Okay.
Right. And so he tilted towards India and befriended Jawaharlal Nehru.
Okay.
I don't know historically if he was already friends with him or not, but they grew closer.
But the idea of Sheikh Abdullah was to go with Pakistan.
The idea of Sheikh Abdullah was, of course, to establish. I mean, that was the rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
His personal ambition was to rise,
Okay.
and become the ruler of Kashmir in whatever way he could. And since it was a time of uncertainty, we didn't know at that time whether there will be a partition, whether when Britishers would leave. All that was uncertain. But as a politician, his ambition was to be the ruler. And Maharaja Hari Singh was obviously a problem there because he was the ruler, and there was no democracy still. So he wanted to create an atmosphere of enmity among the masses against the Maharaja. And he colluded with the British administration also, which also was they wanted to destabilize the Maharaja's rules to keep him under check. That's how it happened. So when this thing with his relationship with Jinnah, when he came to know that it is not going to work, then he started getting closer to Nehru.
Okay.
And in 1947, when the Britishers finally left, then at that time, Maharaja Hari Singh, it was already known because it was obvious to everyone that Kashmir would not survive as an independent country. And being the ruler of Kashmir, Maharaja Hari Singh very well knew that he would have to accede to India, and he was tilting that way.
Okay.
Not tilting, he was sure of that. However, because India was, the Union of India was headed by Jawaharlal Nehru and Sardar Patel, was the bigger party, and they were arm-twisting people. The instruments of accession were written in a way in which they would not be favorable to the erstwhile rulers. There were so many points of negotiation happening everywhere. And so Maharaja Hari Singh, he kind of took his time, and he said that let things settle and we'll figure it out and we'll accede. We'll have to accede. Obviously, he didn't say that. He said that I'm considering what I'll do. So this was a negotiating strategy to buy some time, to let things settle and to get more things going for him in favor in the instrument of accession. But suddenly the Kabalis,
Okay.
the tribals from the northwest province, they were sent by the Pakistanis to attack
Okay.
and to invade Kashmir.
Okay.
And these were just a bunch of almost animals.
Okay. So this is happening while the talk
Yeah,
between the Indian government and
this is between-
Maharaja Hari Singh
this is
was
between-
taking place.
Yeah, this is between August and October.
Okay.
Of 1947, and all this is going on, and they ran all over the place and they created havoc. They raped, looted, plundered, killed people, and Maharaja Hari Singh himself was, he had a small army. It was a princely state and mostly under the British. The army was not capable. His army was not strong enough to fight them. They put up some resistance, but it didn't work out. Interestingly, there was a revolt within the army, a betrayal of the forces by the Muslim members of the army,
Okay.
and they sided with the other side, which even further emboldened these Kabalis. So in a hurry, the instrument of accession had to be signed, and Kashmir joined the Union of India. Now today's rhetoric about this is that, oh, Maharaja Hari Singh, he should have, he wasted so much time, and we had to give up that Baltistan and that area to Pakistan because of his folly. It was not a folly. It was both the Indian government and Maharaja Hari Singh were caught unaware because Pakistan acted in such a unethical and expected manner, as they always do. So that is how the accession of India to Kashmir happened, to accession of Kashmir to India happened, and how we lost that bit of northwest Kashmir, the Gilgit-Baltistan region, and Neelam Valley, and all those beautiful places.
Okay. Tell us about the story of special status which was given after the annexation as well, Ashishji. Because like a lot of debates has been happening on the Article 370 and the 35A as well. So tell us about the special status and how it was conferred to Kashmir as well.
Well, in this total chaos that followed the accession and surrounding the accession of Kashmir to India, Jawaharlal Nehru and Sheikh Abdullah, because they were close, and I don't know what, but Pandit Nehru had a soft corner for the Muslims. That is pretty well established.
The Congress itself.
The Congress itself. Now, to be fair to him, I don't entirely blame him, because what he wanted to do is continuing even today in a different form, which is what he was trying to address was the problem of Hindu-Muslim coexistence. If you have, let's say, I don't know the exact numbers, but let's say 15 to 20% of your population is Muslim, and about 75 to 80 is Hindu. This curious mix, and let's be honest about it, this is like oil and water. It is not going to mix. So the problem before him was, how do we take this country forward with this deep fault line between two religious communities? So that is when the religion of nationalism was born, Indian nationalism.
Okay.
And he said that we need to subsume religious identities into the national identity, and that was his program for as prescription for the entire country. That is how nationalism became a great word. I mean, it was already in Europe. It is still, and it was a problematic word after World War II. But nationalism in India acquired a status a prestigious status, and everyone aspired to be nationalistic because of this Nehruvian push towards that. The idea was that Hindus and Muslims both will forget their differences as religions and identify with the national identity. In Kashmir, because Muslims were in majority, he applied the same principle, and he thought that we will extend as many privileges and benefits to Muslims, sort of buy off their loyalty by developing Kashmir, by funding infrastructure projects, by generating employment, by basically by spoiling the population with freebies and all kinds of stuff. It is interesting that till the time that we were in Kashmir, we wouldn't pay for electricity.
Okay.
It's another matter that electricity situation in Kashmir was very poor in the 80s. I don't know how it is now. But the fact is that using electricity without paying, I don't think this was happening in other parts of the country, right? So this kind of policy of appeasement was because he wanted this very precarious mix of demography where Hindus are outnumbered. But he thought that this nationalism could be spread to Kashmir. And because Muslims were very upset about the fact that they had to accede to India, and because in some sense, Sheikh Abdullah, out of his personal thing, he tilted towards India because of his personal ambition. And a section of the Muslim population, especially the clerics and all, had deep sympathies with Pakistan and wanted to go that way. So because of these various complicated factors, the masses in Kashmir were kind of, they were not very happy with the fact that they had to come to India. And Pandit Nehru wanted to appease them that way and tell them that, you have taken the right decision. And so Article 370 came into place as an assurance to them, saying that your demographic, the total imbalance in your favor is not going to be changed. You will remain as you are. It will be a Muslim majority place and no outsiders will come. But you just tolerate these handful of Kashmir Hindus that are there, and you live together as Indians and all that, whatever it there was. So that was the logic behind 370 in Nehru's mind.
Okay.
But what it did, we also, because it was weaponized by Muslims and their leaders, and it created an atmosphere where being Hindu was extremely hard in the valley.
Okay. So tell us about the political history of Kashmir after the independence as well, and what was the role of Congress or the viewpoint of Congress towards Kashmir, Ashish ji?
Political history of Kashmir after this 1947 is quite straightforward actually. The initial chaos and the complication led to this Article 370 and one regime after another. So the center used to install like puppet regimes there.
Okay.
And so that they could be in control of the situation. Having granted Article 370 and all these privileges and a different constitution to the state itself, so they were insecure about the fact that this could get out of control because the free flow of constitution, of the Indian constitution, was not there in the valley, right? So the grip of the union on the state was always tenuous. So as a political remedy to this situation, the government of India, which was then headed by the Congress party, they devised a way of bypassing this inconvenience by installing their own puppets from time to time. And it is interesting that these best friends, Jawaharlal Nehru and Sheikh Abdullah, just after his accession happened and he became the first Prime Minister, he was called Prime Minister of Kashmir, not Chief Minister. After that, things went downhill for them and Nehru basically banished him.
Okay.
He sent him on house arrest.
Okay.
Long vacation to Kodaikanal.
Okay.
So that's so much for their friendship. But yeah, so because Sheikh Abdullah was a threat,
Hmm.
and he removed him and installed other Congress leaders, uh, and for a while all was hunky dory. Everything went peaceful and nice. There were Bollywood films being shot there,
Okay.
and there was a general euphoria about development and democracy and all that. All propaganda, political propaganda, that this is great, or this is happening. And I think to a large extent the Kashmiri people had also, the Kashmiri Muslims had also reconciled to the fate that they were going to be with India, and they were enjoying all the benefits of being with India.
Okay.
But then what happened is that after 30 years.
Yeah, I'll ask a question here. Sorry to interrupt. So we have seen that in many movies, even in Tamil movies like Kashmir, beautiful Kashmir. There was a song, very famous song in Tamil as well, and like many movies, like we used to see that that Kashmir has been a tourist spot and wonderful. We can have go and have a wonderful time over there as well. So what happened and what time did Kashmir turned into a value of a place for terror as well?
Yeah. So in the 60s, there was a case of a Hindu girl uh, who absconded with a Muslim man.
Okay.
Now, Kashmiri Hindus were a very conservative community, still are. And the conservatism is on account of survival strategy, right? You cannot afford to be liberal when you are when death is staring you in the face, when you could be exterminated, and when you have a history of such oppression happening against you. So this became a big news, a big issue for the Kashmiri community, Hindu community, and they took to the streets, the Hindus, and they said that this cannot happen. We will not allow Kashmiri girls to be, abducted, or this is how they termed it. There might be a view that she went on her own accord, which is also fair. But all said and done, the community did not accept this elopement of the girl with a Muslim. And so there was a lot of protest, and people sat on dharna and all that. And things got a little tense.
Okay.
And then Muslims started retaliating also.
Okay.
And so it became a riot-like situation. Obviously Hindus were outnumbered, but because we lived in concentrated localities together, so it was not so easy for the Muslims also. This was in the 60s when it was not common for people to carry AK-47 like in the 80s. So there were no arms and ammunition available. So it was still a man-to-man fight. And there was a lot of violence that happened there in the streets. But then the government of India again sent some representatives, and they intervened in the matter and kind of, swept it under the rug, and everything was back to normal. But in the 70s, when Indira Gandhi rose to power, she had a brainwave of getting Sheikh Abdullah back
Okay.
to Kashmir. Probably because she thought he was her uncle or something. Might have given her a toffee.
Okay.
So she didn't like him enjoying his stay in Kodaikanal.
So he has been brought back to Kashmir.
She brought him back. And that turned out to be a disastrous step.
Okay.
Because Sheikh Abdullah, immediately after getting back, he got back with a vengeance. And he again started the same subversive activity. And by the time, if I'm not wrong, Ziaul Haq had also risen to power. Whether or not that coincides with that date, I'll have to check. But basically, he started again. He was probably in touch with the ISI, and the Pakistanis also had their person in place. So he was dilly-dallying between India and Pakistan again. Now there was no Jinnah also, so he was not a problem for him. And he became a tool of subversion by the ISI in Kashmir. And this sort of restarted the period of trouble in Kashmir.
Okay.
And then when Ziaul Haq formally, he became the all-powerful dictator that he was, he started his policy of bleeding India with 1,000 cuts and all that. By that time, they had lost 2 wars already, and so they had changed their strategy, and now they wanted to bleed India through 1,000 cuts. And part of this was the insurgency in Punjab and Kashmir.
Okay.
Punjab was a different case, but Kashmir was an open ground for them because of the demographic situation there. It was a Muslim majority country, state, and the people had sympathies with Pakistan. And by the 80s, the masses, as I said, the democratization of jihad happened, and the masses were completely anti-India. And it is nonsense when these. I recently saw a podcast, a popular podcast, this Beer Biceps, where ex-police officer, ex-IPS officer who had served in the valley, he was talking nonsense about how in the 90s what happened with Kashmiri Pandits. Oh, it was terrible, but not all people were with them. It is all nonsense.
Okay.
The masses. Obviously, when you say the masses, you are not counting every last person, right? You will always find someone who will say no. You'll find someone reasonable. You'll find someone who has, who might have favored India, right? But by and large, the masses were with Pakistan.
Okay.
And we saw that in our everyday dealings.
Okay.
We were mocked and made fun of and made to chant Allahu Akbar or Jai or what is this Pakistan Zindabad slogans as kids. So this was everywhere, and by that time the masses had completely been taken in with the idea of going to Pakistan.
Okay. Since you brought the topic of Pandit killings, I wanted to ask you many questions about that in a brief manner as well. So, what happened in early 90s, or let's say in the later period of 80s as well? Why did they were so angry about the Kashmiri Pandits who are living there? And let's talk about, as you said about that podcast as well, we'll talk about the nature of people who lived in Kashmir, as well as the valley people, as well as the people who are in local services. Let's talk about all of them. So what happened in late 80s or early 90s, Ashish ji?
So, because we touched upon that podcast, in that the question that was asked to this guest was whether Kashmir Files showed the reality of Kashmir accurately or not. And the guest answered saying no, it didn't.
Okay.
And when I was watching that part of because I couldn't watch the whole thing. When I was watching that part of the interview where he said no, I was expecting that he would say that no, it was not the reality because the reality was much worse.
Okay.
But what he ended up saying was no, actually what happened with them is terrible, but forget about that. Muslims also suffered a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, of course the Muslims suffered a lot. But that suffering was on account of their own voluntary suffering.
Okay.
They wanted to wage jihad and they were willing to make those sacrifices. And I may even say that hats off to them for their conviction that they did it. But the suffering was voluntary, and they invited all that on themselves. So, but with us it was totally different. No? We had nothing. We had no stake in that matter. It was a conflict between the Indian state and Kashmiri Muslims. And we were nobodies.
Okay.
We had no voice. There is a section of so-called right-wing Hindus who believe that, who say that, Kashmiri Hindus were elites because in Indira Gandhi's cabinet there were these 3 Kashmiri IS officers who were taking all the decisions. And they were enjoying plush posts, like Parkhadat says, they were enjoying plush posts, and so they are responsible for their own thing. unfortunately, that is a very, very
How can
distorted.
those three people be responsible for the whole community?
Exactly. It's like saying that Rajputs are responsible for the reservation system in India because VP Singh was a Rajput. It makes no sense.
Okay.
Uh, or, or anyway, so in the late 80s, after 1986, and after Maqbool Bhatt, this guy, the JKLF commander, was after Maqbool Bhatt was hanged and Pakistan was in full force trying to separate Kashmir from India, and they were using all the channels possible, including terrorism, diplomacy, everything else. Um, as I said, the people of Kashmir were fully with the idea of Pakistan going with Pakistan. There was no demand for separation because, like Maharaja Hari Singh, this is an important point. Like Maharaja Hari Singh knew that there was no chance that Jammu and Kashmir would exist as an independent country. Similarly, Kashmiri Muslims also knew that there was no chance that they were going to be a separate country. But this was a negotiating tool again, saying that, oh, we want to be a free Islamic country. They were not even saying Islamic. We just need our democratic rights, as if there were no democratic rights. But everyone in the late 80s, that was not even part of the mainstream narrative there. It was very openly stated that we want to go with Pakistan. This was common. And in fact, they used to celebrate Pakistan's Independence Day and then do a blackout on 15th August.
Okay.
14th August used to be the celebration, 15th August used to be a blackout. So we used to be I remember as a child, we had to switch off all the lights in our houses, put a black flag on top of the house, and just sit quietly. And if you even switch on the TV, that feeble light that goes out of the window would invite stones.
Okay.
Right, so people would throw stones.
Okay.
And these would be kids, right, small kids playing cricket outside on the street. If they saw that Hindu house has a light, they would take that as rebellion by the kafir.
Why? Like a simple question is rising in my mind. Why these things are not known to the mainstream media or to the mainstream media as well, Ashishji?
No, it's known, but it's been systematically suppressed.
Okay.
The media back then was not as as free as it is now. It's a different matter that it is still not free, but let's not go there. But at least media was state controlled back then. Now it is in private hands. Private media has its own problems, but let's forget about that. In this case, the media only did what the government asked to do.
Okay.
Only covered what the government would ask them to do. And so they completely blacked out whatever was happening in Kashmir. And the people in the rest of the country were dependent on just one channel, which is Doordarshan. And if Doordarshan does not show it, how will you sitting in Tamil Nadu know about what is happening in Kashmir? And there was no internet. So all these things combined led to a complete denial of what was going on in Kashmir. And when all of a sudden we had to leave the valley overnight, when 500,000 people went to, they left everything behind and went to various parts of India, primarily Jammu and Delhi is where we shifted. People just thought that, oh, why are these Kashmiris here? Oh, there is something wrong there. Okay, must be something, let's carry on with our business.
Okay.
So that's the kind of attitude that Hindu society generally outside had, and you can't blame them entirely for it. But in the late 80s, it was a full-blown war, which was a civil war.
Okay.
And I stress on the civil war because it was a war which was led by the masses.
Okay.
Not
why target especially Kashmiri pandits as well?
Because we were Hindus.
Okay.
And
there were many people object to the word minority among minorities. What's that mean actually?
No, because they object to the word because it is inconvenient to their political ideology.
Okay.
You see, this this template of nationalism which I was talking about, Nehruvian nationalism, it is still in place. Let me say that.
Okay.
It has not gone anywhere. It
Mm.
has just taken a different name.
Mm.
Because, you see, for a democratic leader or a democratically elected government, whichever party may be in power, the question of Hindu-Muslim coexistence cannot be solved in the time periods or the time cycles that democracy operates in, which is 5 years.
Okay.
So when a government is elected to power, its window is 5 years. So it's basically a myopic form of government. And so what do you incentivize? That in order to retain power, you will have to do stuff in 5 years that will make people elect you again. So there is no long game in place. And this problem can only be solved in a long game format, where you think of how it would be in, let's say, we're sitting in 2023. It has to have a civilizational vision to say that in 2123, 100 years later, this is where we want India to be. And this is the composition of India, of the demographic composition of India, that will secure the civilization. If that is the view that you have, a long-term view, then you will be able to do incremental changes, small changes, and you will eventually get there. And people will not even notice that you had a plan. This is how statecraft works. But if you are, if you are compelled to follow these election cycles of 5 years, then there is no incentive for a leader to think beyond those 5 years. So even today, whatever we see around us in terms of appeasement politics, in terms of how the whole debate is framed, how the question of Hindu-Muslim conflict or fault lines is avoided in domestic politics. While abroad, when you look at the Western media coverage of India, they seem to be, they seem to be endorsing or propagating this view that India today is under a fascist regime, where there is this Hindu nationalist leader who wants to carry out a genocide of the Muslims. This ridiculous narrative is endorsed by the best of their outlets.
Okay.
So that is the view from outside. Inside, it is the opposite.
Mm.
And this dichotomy is on account of the compulsions that the media has. I will not get into that. But my main point here is that Nehruvian nationalism is very much alive.
Okay.
And it is continuing to govern the government's outlook towards these matters.
Okay. So since you talk about the Kashmir files also, the climax was really so scary as well. So were they that much cruel in reality as well, Ashish ji?
Oh yes, of course. I mean those scenes in Kashmir files that you found to be disturbing, those are not fictional scenes.
Okay.
Those are actually relatable to the happenings on the ground, to news reports that you can still verify. Like the final climax scene is the Nadi Marg massacre, where they actually called the whole village out, then separated Hindus from Muslims, then they asked the Hindus to line up and they shot them one by one. This is all documented. There is no fabrication, there is no fiction here. Similarly, the same kind of stuff happened in Vandhama in 1909, I think. Then there was a massacre of Sikhs in Chhattisgarh. So all these things have happened, and there is no fictional element there. Just a small digression about Kashmir files. I think one of the things that I thought could have been done better in Kashmir files was the fact that the story could have been told in a way that it stuck to the actual news reports and how it happened. But because the script was written to accommodate so many anecdotes and so many cruelties, and I think they wanted to say so many things. They had one chance and they wanted to say it all. So the script kind of got jumbled that, after this family, everything had to be shown with this family only. So this guy, the kid who was 6 months old in the beginning, At the time of the massacre, he's shown to be 2 years old, while in actuality he would have been 10 years old.
Okay.
So those things are there, but that's more like a critique of the film as a piece of art, not what it represents. It represents the reality perfectly.
Okay, okay. So, what is your message to the fellow Hindu community fellow Hindu over the throughout the nation as well?
My message is, I've been repeating this message over and over again, is that instead of wasting time in criticizing Kashmiri Hindus, which has become a national pastime now, because a lot of, and especially a lot of BJP supporters, I must say,
Okay.
because they think that, they think that they know it all. Oh, now Article 370 is gone, why don't these guys go back? Whether we go back or not, whether we choose to go back or not, let it remain our problem. We are anyway not useful in electoral politics. We don't have the numbers. Plus, we are Brahmins, so no one anyway listens to us. What Hindus can learn is that they need to recognize what happened in Kashmir and let them prevent this from happening in other parts of the country. That is all that is needed. You may agree, you may like, you may dislike Kashmiri pandits for various reasons, but keep that aside. But take the learning and understand that this could happen to the person next door or even to you if remedial measures are not taken in time. And one of the remedial measures which has come as a suggestion from some groups of our community itself is this bill called we call it the Rehinge bill, which is the reversal of Hindu genocide, which asks the government of India to set up an inquiry commission and set up a special investigating team monitored by constitutional bodies and do a fact-finding analysis of what transpired in Kashmir in the later 80s and early 90s and make the clear-cut case of genocide that it is. A lot of people say, oh, only 250 people, Kashmiri Hindus died, there are 10,000 Muslims died, so how is this a genocide? One, the number is suppressed because these are official numbers, but even if you say that even if the actual numbers are counted, they are also not much. What they are doing is that they are restricting their analysis to just that 1 year, 1990, while the genocide has happened over 600 years. So all that has to be taken into account. So Rehinge is a bill which is proposed to be tabled that recognizes what happened in Kashmir as a genocide and asks the government of India to recognize it based on the 1949 Geneva Convention of United Nations and then carry out certain steps to prevent this from happening in other parts of India where Hindus are vulnerable, which would include parts of Bengal, even parts of Uttar Pradesh, parts of Kerala, and various other places. So that is something that the government, it shouldn't be us, because for us as a community, it's over. Why should we be now worried about Rehinge and all that? But we are doing it because we see that this might happen all over again in other places. And so it would be nice if Hindus could extend their support to such initiatives for their own good.
So thank you so much for your wonderful time, Ashish. Since you have a meeting which is upcoming there, so I'll end it here, and we will have a discussion about the movie Kashmiri Files in a very brief manner as well in our next podcast session. So thank you so much for your wonderful time, Ashish.
Thank you,
Namaste.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.